welcome to IndiNations 7 Generations Investing. I'm Jeremy Bryan, and this is powered by IndiWealth. Today, we're going to talk about distribution strategies. So our first of this 4-part series was discussing just kind of the broad approach of kind of strategy and stewardship for minors trusts. Today, I want to dig in a little bit more into the distribution components of it and the different ways you can set that up to align your policies with your purpose. So this is really important. The distribution components and how you distribute these assets can really have a significant influence on the outcomes you're trying to achieve. And so that's what we'll go over today, is just talk a little bit about what those strategies are and the risk return and the trade-offs that you do for each of these individual strategies. And what I'll talk about later, and what I'm going to start with right now, is there's not a perfect answer, but there is the best solution for your nation and for your tribe that is one of these that aligns your policy with your purpose. So let's get started on it. So why does this matter at the outset? I think distribution policy supports your beneficiaries, and it can support them through multiple avenues. Education, they can use it for education funding. If you give it to them at 18, maybe they get college funding out of it and use it for that. Maybe it's continuing education down the road, master's degrees, law degrees, these kinds of things that can refoster and really build that up your constituents and your beneficiaries into building their own careers and their own goals. Homes, that's absolutely an essential part, is that, a shelter that is something they can call their own over a longer period of time, and something that allows them for stability going forward, which is outstanding. And lastly, maybe starting businesses, right? A lot of these can be done to allowing you to provide that beginning resource to allow them to make their decisions. What are the best approaches that your beneficiaries want to take? Do they want to start a business? Do they want to have a home? Do they want to use it for college funding? These kinds of things are something that the tribal council can really kind of address the distribution strategy to match what they want to do, that they think is the most aligned with their preferred outcomes going forward. Trust assets can circulate within the nation. I think this is absolutely essential, is that a lot of this comes back, hopefully, is that if you provide decent housing, if you provide an educational platform, if you provide opportunities for your beneficiaries to start their own businesses, a lot of the time, this can regenerate back into the community and create either greater stability, greater prosperity, and also greater nation building over a longer period of time. So providing that infrastructure, having a distribution strategy that focuses on supporting that, can really bring benefits back into the nation as well. Reinforces, community responsibility with individual wealth. Again, the individual wealth is a portion of that, is that you are distributing to your beneficiaries something that you hope gives them a leg up and gives them a start to doing the things that they want to do. A lot of times you can align that strategy to be aligned with your community responsibility and allow your beneficiaries to be responsible to the community over a longer period of time as well, is again, bringing it back to the nation that has supported them at the outset. A lot of times those monies and the history and the experience and the things that they do with those funds can really regenerate back into the community over a longer period of time. I think properly structured trusts strengthen both the nation and the individuals within there. So it's not just a beneficiary that gets a pile of money and call it a day. I think a lot of it, if you design it properly, can build the nation up as well. I think it shapes real life outcomes. Your distribution strategy, if you have a strong one, your distributions are aligned with your purpose. That's what I talked about before, is saying, what are the things that are most important to us as a tribal council and as a tribal citizen base? What are the things that we consider as a nation to be among the most important things? And how can we align our minors trust strategy to really align with that purpose over a longer period of time? I think timing and taxes can really work together too. I'll talk about the lack of a burden, the tax burden from a lack of planning that can happen as well. I'm not going to get hardcore into the weeds in any of these things. If you want to have a discussion specifically on how tax can be adjusted or probably better managed, is what I would call it, certainly give us a call and we can have that discussion. But there are ways to plan and there are ways to align it so that timing and taxes can work a little bit better and avoid some of those aggressive tax burdens when they're not ready for it. Individual support, community benefit. I said that before. I said that on the last slide, is that you're providing individual support that hopefully eventually makes its way back in some way, shape, or form. Even if it doesn't, over a longer period of time, giving a stable building block to your minors who then can go out into the world and provide what they're going to provide. Some won't be perfect, some will be great, and so a lot will be right in the middle, which is absolutely fine. But you're starting them off on a good foot to allow them to build what they're going to build over a longer period of time, and hopefully bring that back to the community to support future generations as we go forward. On the lack of planning side, I think the biggest one is the first one, is that money just arrives before financial maturity. When I was 18, I was dumb about money. I have spent my career being smarter about these things, but at the outset, I was not the smartest person on the planet with regard to what I was going to do with my money. I always thought I had a plan and I always thought I had things, but I had to build the education to really become consistent in how I have built my life and how I've built my financial support community and built my financial life, if you will. A lot of times, if you get a pile of money and you don't have that education, it can have pretty negative outcomes, or just maybe not optimal outcomes. And so understanding that the money arriving before financial maturity can create some more difficult circumstances. Again, the tax burden for beneficiaries, if you just give one lump sum and, at 18 and say, here you go, have fun with this, a lot of times that first thing they have to do is realize that they have a big tax burden that comes as a result of that, and that the net that they're actually getting is significantly lower than the gross they assume, and they overspend and they adjust, again, because those two things can intertwine, is that they make bad decisions and then they end up owing a big tax bill that doesn't really get them started on the right foot. I think this one's a sneakier one, is that organizational risk and leadership friction. If you don't have a plan in place and you really haven't talked about what the purpose are for these assets, is that, again, during the tribal council changeover, which is inevitably going to happen as you do a minors trust, there's no question about it. It could lead to greater organizational risk, is that the function and the purpose get changed up a lot, and leadership doesn't know what to do with it because we haven't established what's most important to us over a longer period of time. So I think taking a step back and understanding what that is important, and having that plan in place can really shape those real life outcomes over a longer period. Talking about model selection, I think model selection is more of a values choice, right? Is that the distribution strategy, each of these have trade-offs, right? No matter if you do lump sum, milestone, whatever you want to do, they're going to have some trade-offs. And so starting with sovereignty and self-determination versus protecting minors before financial maturity. So how much do you want to trust your people to make decisions right at the outset? And hand them the money and saying, here, go do what you want to do with this. And you may have very good outcomes for some of your people. And how much do you want to protect them to make sure that they're educated and understand what this money can do for them over a longer period of time before you hand them the keys, if you will? So again, it's not perfect. I mean, you don't have to be fully, sovereign and self-determination and say, here you go, have fun, see you later. And you also don't have to be fully protected too, and saying, well, we're only going to distribute out a little bit at a time. You have to realize that, you have to create some level of responsibility, but you also want to provide them an educational backdrop. So there's a little bit of a blend there that I think fits most. Equality across beneficiaries or flexibility. So equality means everybody gets the exact same thing, right? Is that, hey, it's equal. We're going to make it equal. You get the same amount as you get the same amount as you get the same amount. Or do you want to be flexible and saying there are things that we prefer that you do? And so we want to align our distribution strategy to matching that up. And so we're going to give more for this and less for this, or we're going to give a base level, but we might give some incentive structure for the things that you accomplish. And so these structures can be, how rigid do you want to be versus how flexible do you want to be, and how much do you want to align that at the outset? Again, not a right or wrong answer, but a trade-off to understand. And lastly is, certainty of policy. Again, predictable, that kind of goes along with the equality side, right? Is that, hey, I know I'm getting this at this date. That's it. And it's coming in, and that's what I get, and that's what you get, and that's where you're going forward, and you're done from this point. Very predictable, very bankable, and very certain. Versus how much discretionary do you want to have in saying, well, us as a community and as a council, we believe there are things that we want to achieve, and there's purposes that we want you to align with, and we want to be responsive to those needs, versus just saying, here it is, call it a day. And how much discretion do you want to have within there, and how much flexibility? I think discretion and flexibility really kind of goes again, or is the trade-off between equality and certainty. And where does that equilibrium lie will be different for every nation going forward. So the 5 distribution models, here's where I'm going to spend most of our time here. I wanted to talk about these, and really, again, I want to start with the thought process that none of these are the perfect one. There is no such thing. It really is a choice from the nation that, hey, what aligns best with us? And what is the structure that is going to shape the outcomes that we want to have? So let's start on the left-hand side. Is lump sum is one full distribution at a defined trigger point, and it's usually age-based. So what's the trade-off here is that, again, the benefit of here it is, we're calling it a day. That's it. What's the trade-off on that? Simplicity and self-determination is absolutely probably more on this side, is that's you're going to get this money and you do with it what you will. But very limited structure to manage tax, and rapid depletion is certainly a potential here. Again, if you haven't reached financial security and you get a lump sum and you don't know what to do with it, well, guess what you're going to do with it? Sometimes you're not going to do the most optimal thing with it. So from that side, again, that's the trade-off, is simplicity, self-determination on one side versus potential for aggressive tax cost and potential for rapid depletion, because you've allowed somebody who maybe hasn't reached financial maturity yet to make decisions that they may not be ready for. Staggered age, which is, fixed percentages at different age groups. So 18, 25, 30, whatever you may be. Because if you're setting up the minors trust, you can set it up in the way that you feel is best. So if those ages aren't right, if it's 18, 21, 25, whatever that may be, predictable and easy to administer. That's a benefit, right? Is that, again, a lot of times tribal councils, will use outsourced not financing, but outsourced people to do the trust administration. But there is still operational costs to establishing a minors trust and to maintaining a minors trust over a longer period of time. So the more you get further down these lines here, and the more the flexibility, the differences, the milestones, the things that it just becomes more difficult to administer. Again, difficulty is not necessarily negative. It's just becoming more difficult. And can you support that infrastructure that you need to administer these things going forward? And so a staggered age, it's pretty predictable. I mean, it's just age-based, and you're just doing it at multiple periods instead of one lump sum. But the other side, again, is may not responsible to actual circumstances or readiness. Age is the things that you want to do at 18 versus 21 versus 25 can be very different depending on who you talk to, right? Is that some people are extremely emotionally mature and extremely financially mature at 18. Some are. Some are much later down the road. And so you may not have that readiness, and just having it just staggered aged, again, it's a trade-off component. It's easy to administer. It's relatively, it's simple to understand versus there are some issues with potentially giving those. And also staggering that is that, the need at one particular point in time may be more aggressive at one age versus another. And so, if you're distributing these out, you may be setting it up on a fixed asset basis, 33, 33, 33% each of those three times. It may be different. How you administer that could have some influence on what they can reasonably use those assets for. On the milestone-based side, distributions, again, tied to achievement. That's the milestone, whether that's a degree, starting a business, buying a home, these kinds of things that I talked about before. That can be a distribution component. Hey, you're going to use this. Well, that's a milestone that we care about, that we think is valuable, and that's a triggering point for receiving some of the assets from this minors trust. It reinforces the values, and judges' achievement can create potential inequality, right? What if somebody doesn't want to own a home, right? And they want to be a renter because they want to be flexible in their lifestyle and they want to travel, and they may go to city to city to city. And is that necessarily a negative, that they should be penalized to a certain extent for that, about not wanting to own a home? And if they get an excellent job and they don't want to start a business, well, again, that's a milestone that may never want to do. If they become if they become a lawyer that works underneath a practice for a long period of time, but are very happy and successful in their career as an employee, who are we to say that that's a bad thing? So you have to understand that there are trade-offs even on those milestones. They all sound terrific, but there are offsets to those things too, which may create circumstances that create some inequality for the actual distributions. On the discretionary side, again, it's up to the committee and trustee to accelerate or restrict distributions, based upon individual circumstance, right? Or specific milestones, or things that they want to put together that is a structured base, but is discretionary based upon what the committees want to do. I think that's the most responsive model. Obviously, it can make those things, but it's going to be incredibly hard to administer. If you have a handful of minor beneficiaries on this, then, maybe it's worth it. Maybe it's saying, hey, on a one-off basis, yes, you need money for this, come to the council, tell us what you need, and we could have that. Well, imagine doing that across hundreds and thousands. You just can't do it. So there is a component of difficulty to administer, and also that fairness principle and the governance concerns that come as a result of that, because one tribal council during year one may be very different from year 5 and may have very different thought philosophies and processes and things that they want to distribute, which makes that the governance an issue. So just understanding that those kinds of things can be an impediment as well. And extended lifetime, I did like the little graphic there. It made me laugh. Distributions just continue over lifetimes, right? Is that, we do a percentage per year, or there's a milestone and then percentages per year. But again, it's just over a longer period of time do we do this. I think it projects intergenerational wealth, is that, doling this out over longer periods of time and distributing that in that manner can create the components of having a backdrop of always having something coming down the road, which is great. But on the other side, you have very high admin costs, similar to, again, discretionary or milestone. There may be higher administrative costs when you have things to achieve or ways you want to do this. And I think this is your longest restrictions too. Again, it may not be available to the people who need it at the time they need it the most. And so understanding that as well is a component you have to take into consideration when you do those types of issues. So again, from a distribution model perspective, there may be a real great reason to use lump sum. There may be a great reason to use milestone based. There may be a hybrid component that you do in this. Absolutely fine, but you need to understand that what you set up is going to be the predominant source of the outcomes you are looking for. Hopefully they put it in the positive light from that fashion, but also you're going to have some trade-offs that you're going to have to understand and deal with as a counselor and executive administrator of a minors trust that you just have to realize that this is something you're going to have to answer for down the road. So, how do we choose the right model? I think you start with what are the community priorities? What are the things that are most important to us? What and how do we just set up a distribution strategy that aligns with them? I think your population size absolutely has to be taken into consideration. Again, especially as you go further into discretionary components, how can we do this on a sizable population? Again, if it's a handful, may not be an issue at all. But if the population is growing and expanding, and you're increasing those numbers more and more, it becomes real burden and an administrative burden and just a fairness burden as well, and making sure that you're not doing things for one group that you aren't doing for another, so that inequality can come into play just based upon size considerations, is that it just gets out of hand. Administrative capacity, I just kind of talked about that with size. They kind of go hand in hand. Is that as we get bigger, do we have the administrative capacity to cover this? And if we want to be highly discretionary, can we do this with what we currently have in our infrastructure? So you have to understand that, and how much freedom are you willing to get without losing the core values? These kinds of things. Can we outsource some of this stuff without losing our value proposition? And so I think there is a benefit to using outsourced solutions for administrative components of this, just simply because there are experts in the field, both in the investment field and the trust administration, that can really help and really give you scale pretty quickly on what you're doing here. But you really do want to hold on to those core value components too, and making sure that what you've set up aligns with what you want as an outcome. How much flexibility are you willing to tolerate, and how much do you want to do that? How much inconsistency is worthwhile, and who makes those choices? Something you're going to have to come, especially if you get more and more on the discretionary side. How much and who decides that on that flexibility component is out there, and is a question you'll have to have answered. Again, closing, there is no one universally correct model. Only use what fits the nation's circumstances, and sometimes it's going to be a couple of them. Here's where we come into play at IndiWealth: is we are an investment manager, and so we think it's very important for us to understand the trust philosophy and understand what outcomes you're trying to achieve. And then we develop investment strategies to match that distribution policy. And so we believe, and we've talked about this ad nauseum in our other videos, but we believe in the time horizon to distribution solution. I think that's incredibly valuable tool to setting up the strategy to align with the distribution policies. So again, it's a time weighted. So 0 to 24 months, if we have significant resources coming out in the next 2 years, those assets, should be highly liquid. They shouldn't be taking a lot of risk, and they should be relatively low volatility, because you're going to need them in the next couple of years. And you don't want to lose 30, 40% based upon what you invested in. I'd rather have security and knowing that those assets are going to be there. Yes, you're going to sacrifice some potential long-term growth by doing that, but I think the safety supersedes that strategy, especially in the near term. In the long term, you should be very growth oriented. You should have a growth oriented allocation, because you can survive those ebbs and flows, and you can actually take advantage of those. Is when everybody's panicking, you can actually find some good things on discount and hopefully increase the value of these assets going forward. So you want to be able to be risk allowed especially when you have 10 plus years to your time frame, because you want those assets to be the predominant engine of how we grow bigger over a longer period of time. And then in that 2 to 10 year frame, that's your hybrid solution, right? You start getting closer, less and less risk the closer and closer you get to distribution method. So at a 10-year outset, you're still probably taking quite a bit of risk in there. But as you get into 4, 3, and 2 years, you're incrementally reducing that risk profile to get more certainty of it, to take less risk over time, because that distribution policy, or that distribution strategy, and the distributions are coming up very soon. I think it absolutely should be built around the money when the money is needed. And this is, in our opinion, the best way to do so. So let's talk about some quick actions to take. I think, obviously, where are we starting? Are we starting fresh, or are we refining an existing structure in our minors trust? As a tribal nation, as maybe a new tribal council person, as we've had a lot of elections here recently, Let's figure that out. Like, are we, do we have a minors trust in place? Yeah, okay, we do. Okay, what does the structure look like? Let's examine that to see if we're aligned with what we think as a new council and as an aggregated council, whether it's new, a mix of new and whether it's completely new, a mix of new, or all incumbents. At least understanding where you're starting from, I think, is important. Confirm whether your current distribution model is clearly defined. What are you doing? If you have an existing structure, how do we distribute it? And even if it says it's all lump sum at 18, okay, at least we know that now. But now we say, does that make sense? What are we weighing for the council? What are, us as council people, an executive administrator, a tribal administrator, a chief financial officer? Let's get together and discuss what we want to weigh. Whether, our existing structure is lump sum now, but it doesn't really fit with what we're trying to do. Maybe we want to add a few milestone components to this. And if we do, what are the milestones that are most important to us? Is it education? Is it housing related? Is it allowing our people to start businesses and giving them some functional tools to get them started in that? Those are the kinds of things that you want to weigh as a council that really start to formulate the strategy, the distribution strategy that you're going to have going forward. You need to clarify your governance roles. Who does what? And who's responsible for what? And who has discretionary authority, and how does that process work? Because if you're going to have discretion, if you're going to have flexibility, you're going to have people that want to utilize that flexibility, right? And you need to have a structured alignment so that who can actually authorize that flexibility and what that process looks like. Otherwise, you're going to devolve into chaos pretty quickly. And then lastly, again, this is where we come into play, is now we know what we want. We know our distribution strategy. We know what our outcomes are. We know what we really want this to entail. How do we make sure that the investments we're doing match what we want to do? And that's where the investment strategist will get together with the tribal council, with the executive administrators, with the trust administrators, to making sure the investment strategy really matches that distribution policy. I've said this before, but clear purpose, clear policy, clear roles, and then review once in a while. Once you can do all that homework up front, you're going to do a lot of homework at the outset. Once you've done that, then it's just a process to make sure you're progressing, and that you're progressing in the fashion that still makes sense to you all going forward. If you like this is, a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more in the weeds, if you will, on distribution. But our Minors Trust and Strategy and Stewardship Guide really kind of provides a much more broad entail of the things that we think here at IndiWealth that are important to focus on when doing a minors trust, or when enacting things that maybe adjust the minors trust going forward. If you want a copy of it, I'll have a link in the description below, or you can visit us at IndiWealthManagement.com. On our resources page, we'll have this there as well. So that's it for this week. Tune in next week. We'll continue on the minors trust component. But until then, thank you very much, and take care of yourself.